Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K Collector, and if you don't think that the re-release of the Neo Geo AES and the re-release of some of the most popular Neo Geo AES games aren't going to have an effect on current Neo Geo prices, you are sadly mistaken. This is a comment that I got on my Neo Geo video, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about this Neo Geo nonsense that's really taken the retro gaming community by storm, because there seems to be a split camp on the impact of this re-release on current retro collecting for the Neo Geo and what's going to happen with the prices. Now, I'm going to preface this all by saying I don't care either way. I don't own any Neo Geo games at this point. I did own an AES console in the past, and I did own three Neo Geo games before. I owned Last Resort. I owned Alpha Mission 2, I think, and Magician Lord. So I've had and owned an AES in the past. I sold it when I sold my entire collection. So I'm familiar with the original hardware and what it feels like. I'm also very familiar and aware of what the pricing is for that console. There are definitely games that go for prices that range all the way up into the thousands. And so I don't think this is a console that's ever been considered to be an easy console to collect for. It's always been considered, I think, on the more expensive side and the higher end of retro game collecting. And so with that being said, I think it's safe to assume that the majority of people who are interested in Neo Geo at all, and this is something that I alluded to in my first video, the people that are going to be the most interested are the people who were already interested in Neo Geo in the past. Now, there's always going to be that group of people who maybe knew about the Neo Geo, but just could never really afford it before. And then maybe when they got older and they were able to like buy more expensive things, by that time the cost of the Neo Geo had just become just way too inflated. I mean, the console can range anywhere between $600 to $1,000, right? And then we're not even going to start talking about the games. But what does this mean now that the new console is being re-released? And like I said, the camp seems to be split. Some people think it's going to affect the retro game prices, and some people think that it won't. Now, I want to specifically I want to make arguments for both sides. I want to make the argument for why it will impact the current prices of retro or Neo Geo retro games, and why it won't. And then at the end, I'm going to go through some highlights because I did pick up some non-Geo retro gaming heat this weekend, so I'll share that with you at the end. But let's first talk about why it's going to impact why it might impact pricing for Neo Geo games and Neo Geo consoles today. Okay, so the first reason is because I think that Neo Geo games had reached a level of inaccessibility to where I think collectors were already accepting the fact that they were going to have to start collecting reproduction games. Or I forgot the term that they use for it, but they're games that use, I think, original components or something like that, but they're just remade games. And I think that it's kind of like when that point, and if you're from New York, you know what I'm going to talk about. There was this point where in New York City, everyone was okay with going down to Canal Street and getting like fake Louis Vuitton bags and fake Fendi bags and fake, you know what I mean? Because the bags were being made and looking so close to the original thing that people just were okay with going and buying fake Louis Vuitton bags. In fact, you had women who actually owned real Louis Vuitton purses, but because they didn't want to necessarily wear or use their Louis Vuitton purses in public in New York for fear of getting mugged, they would actually buy fake Louis Vuitton purses and then use those for like every day. And then they would only really like bring out the real Louis Vuitton purses if they were going somewhere where like, they knew it was going to be really safe and, they really wanted to, floss the real thing. And so I'm making the comparison of, fake Louis Vuitton purses to fake Neo Geo games. I think, there is a certain portion of that community that had already been okay with getting and playing games that were not original hardware, that were not, the stuff in its original case with its original chips, with its original components. I think that community had already been getting accustomed to playing, reproduced games just because of how expensive the originals were. And, some of these reproduced games, even those were starting to climb in price. Those games weren't $20 and $30. Their reproduction games were still a couple $100s. There's still a few hundred, it was still a few $100s to get some of these, non-original Neo Geo games. And that's how expensive they were, right? I mean, if you think about it, you could get a fake copy of Hagane for the Super Nintendo or a fake copy of Metal Warriors for the Super Nintendo, games that cost hundreds of dollars. You could get those games for $20 and $30, but not the Neo Geo. Even fake Neo Geo games are really expensive in comparison to other games from that era. And so the reason why I'm saying that is that, okay, if you're a person who's willing to spend $200 on a fake Neo Geo game, you don't think that same person is going to be willing to spend $90 on a game that's more original to, to the original artifact, that's more closely aligned with the original game than maybe like an aftermarket reproduction? Of course that person will, right? And so I think that when you consider that, the willingness to buy aftermarket Neo Geo games, then I think that it's safe to say that yes, you might see that group of people who, have been waiting for an opportunity to purchase, real Neo Geo games. You might see the market get flooded with those people, and they'll start to ignore all those eBay listings, and they'll start to ignore, all the Neo Geo games that they might see at, retro gaming conventions, because that's really the only place you're going to see a Neo Geo game, especially if it's complete in box. You are never going to see anything like that at GameStop. You're never going to see anything like that at, if you find a Neo Geo set at a yard sale, you better go play the lotto that day, because you were extremely lucky. And so I think when it comes to people's willingness to go an alternate route other than having to pay the money for the real thing, I think that could cause a softening in the Neo Geo market when it comes to pricing for the games. I do think that there will be some softening. I'm not going to say that prices are just going to hold. No, I think you're going to see a lot of fringe collectors and a lot of people who just don't want to spend that money. I think they're going to go ahead and turn to these $90 games, and they're going to have a really good time, and they're going to feel more proud about those cartridges than if they would have gotten the reproduction cartridges, because in their mind it's like, they've got pretty much the real thing. It's just, instead of it being manufactured in 1990 whatever, it was manufactured in 2026, but in their mind it's going to be the real thing. And so I think that will cause and create an impact on pricing. Now I'll make the argument for why prices won't be impacted. The only reason why prices may not be impacted is because the number of retro enthusiasts and retro video game collectors that have real Neo Geo games, or maybe even have a whole set of the Neo Geo library, that number is so small in comparison to the overall video game market, let alone the retro gaming market, and the supply is so limited that unless a large number of current Neo Geo collectors decided to say, oh man, I better offload all my Neo Geo games before they drop in value, that would be unless they do something like that, I don't really see the prices for the original stuff being impacted like that, because that is a very tight niche community, and you don't need a lot of participants in the Neo Geo market to maintain pricing for Neo Geo games. And that's the biggest reason why I don't think pricing will be impacted. I think you need a lot of participants in a lot of the other, categories of retro gaming, whether it be the GameCube or PlayStation 2 or PlayStation or whatever, because a lot of those games were so heavily mass produced, and because there are so many of them in circulation, you need a large number of people to buy into that market in order for that market to stay afloat. I don't think you need the same amount of individuals in the Neo Geo market as you do in like the GameCube market. I think the Neo Geo market can, it might be 10% of the size of the GameCube market, but that's all it really needs for that market to hold strong, because it's a small, tight-knit market of individuals who understand, what comes with collecting Neo Geo games, and they don't really experience the same type of sticker shock that a person who's not used to paying for Neo Geo games might experience when they see the price of original Neo Geo games. And so I think the size of the market, the scope of the market for the Neo Geo, I think because of how small it is and how niche it is, it might be able to sustain itself despite this large influx of individuals who are now either A, discovering the Neo Geo for the first time in their lives, or B, finally getting a chance to own what would feel like, original Neo Geo hardware. So those are my two arguments for and against the Neo Geo pricing staying the same or potentially dropping. You let me know what you think about that in the comments. But before we run, we're gonna take a quick look at some of the really great pickups today, because I am burnt after I did like 3 different video game pickups, and I'm just gonna give you some highlights. So I went ahead and I picked, look at me, I'm like stuttering, I'm so tired. I grabbed a Nintendo DS slot, and I'm gonna show you 3 of the games that I added back from my original collection. The first game being Lufia. So I actually had this in my original DS collection. So glad to have this back. The next up is Contra 4. Really stoked to have this one back as well. I remember when I found my copy of Contra 4 in a thrift store for like $7. It was crazy. This is back in like 2021 to 2022. So I'm glad to have Contra 4 back in my collection. So glad to see that back. And then Chrono Trigger, which I did have a copy of Chrono Trigger in my old collection, only mine did not include the map. So this one actually has the map with it. So I'm glad to have that back in the collection as well. And then this is a new game. I did not have this game in my collection before, but this is a game that I have in my collection now. And it is the Wizard of Oz Beyond the Yellow Brick Road. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this game, but apparently this is a very rare game. A very rare one, not one that you see every day. And the person that I got this from, I think they found this at GameStop somehow. So they got a really good deal on that. So shout out to them for passing that one off to me. So those are some of the DS games that I got. And then I'll show you some PlayStation 2 games that I got. So the first one is Mega Man X Command Mission. I freaking love this Mega Man X game. And this is actually an upgrade from the copy that I had, because my original copy did not have the trading card that comes with this game. This one does have the trading card. So this was a pleasant addition back into the collection. So we finally got Mega Man X Command Mission back. And then we got a clean Black Label copy of Silent Hill 2. So this is another upgrade from my original collection, because my original copy of Silent Hill 2 actually had the greatest hits version. I had every Silent Hill game from 1 all the way up to Shattered Memories. I had it on the Vita. I had them all. So this is my reintroduction back into the Silent Hill series. We'll see if I can get them all again. I don't know. There was a point where GameStop had too many copies of Silent Hill. I mean, I think I got like 4 copies of Silent Hill from GameStop before. So Silent Hill 2 was another addition back into the collection. Then we got 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand, completed. All these are complete, by the way. Every single one is complete. 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand for the Xbox. I actually had this for the PlayStation 3 before, but I don't have, well, I do have a PlayStation 3. I have the backwards compatible. I don't have a 360, so I'm gonna have to get a 360. But I did get this one back in that lot. It was a big lot that I picked up, so really stoked to get that one back. And then another gem. I'm so glad to have this one back. Fist of the North Star, Ken's Rage 2. Really wanted this back. I'm a sucker for beat 'em ups. I love beat 'em ups. And this was one that I wanted to get back as well. So this was one that I was really stoked to add back into the collection. And then last but definitely not least, because I probably got about 70 games this weekend, is this complete and clean copy of Batman for the Sega Genesis. This is super nostalgic for me. This is one of my favorite Batman games growing up as a kid. I loved the Sunsoft Batman games, even the one, Batman Return of the Joker on the NES and on the Game Boy. I believe those were both done by Sunsoft as well. So just some really great games, man. I just really love the way they do things. And this was one that I was glad to add back to the collection as well. And then just looking at a little bit of hardware here, we did get a DSi back into the collection. So you can't have all these DS games without having something to play them on. And this DSi XL was definitely a great addition. I also got a complete in-box DS Lite as well. So got some really good stuff over the weekend. A lot going on. I know there's a lot of talk about the Neo Geo. I know a lot of people are excited and they can't wait to get their hands on it. Me, I'm just out here rebuilding the retro collection, seeing everything that's going on online, and it's just a trip. But let me know what you guys think about what you think was going to happen with the pricing for the Neo Geo. Let me know if you've picked up anything cool this weekend, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.